It was an accident. There's nothing we can do about it. My husband wouldn't accept my plea after I miscarried due to being tripped by my mother-in-law, who was living with us. Even though I could no longer bear children. I hope it's born healthy. 3 years later, my mother-in-law joyfully celebrated my sister-in-law's pregnancy. Treated like a servant every day, my spirit was completely worn down at the time. However, after this, an unexpected turn of events reversed all circumstances, greatly changing my life. My name is Kristen. I married Scott, who was 3 years older than me, when I was 25. We had attended the same university, and I fell in love with him at first sight. After pursuing him relentlessly, he finally noticed me, proposed, and we got married. I was on cloud 9, looking forward to a life with my beloved Scott, who was handsome and kind. But little did I know then that this would be the beginning of difficult days. The first challenge came right after we tied the knot. About our new home, it's okay if we live with Mom, right? Dad's passed away, so she'd be alone otherwise. I was taken aback by Scott's sudden proposal. Before marriage, I had been living alone, but he had been living at home. I had assumed we would look for a new house to live in together. Huh? Aren't we going to live by ourselves? Actually, Mom told me that if we were to get married, living together was a prerequisite. I never heard about this. I blurted out in shock at my husband's sudden confession. Apparently, he had already made an agreement with his mother to live together without my knowledge. This alone was hard to accept, but there was another problem. It seemed that my mother-in-law didn't like me very much. During our first meeting and at the wedding, she only spoke to me when absolutely necessary and occasionally gave me cold looks. I wasn't confident I could get along with a mother-in-law in such a state. However, my husband didn't seem to understand my concerns at all. What's the problem with living together? Don't worry, you'll get along well with Mom. When my beloved said this with a big smile, I couldn't respond. And so, I ended up living in Scott's family home, pushed by his optimistic attitude. But as I had feared, my concerns came true. Sigh. Your cooking isn't very good, is it? To spend so much time making such tasteless food. But it took so long because you forced me to clean in the middle of cooking. Are you talking back? Just because you're young and my son likes you, don't get cocky. You incompetent girl. It seemed my mother-in-law was jealous of me, her son's wife. She couldn't stand to see me happy, so she made me quit my job saying, a woman should stay at home after marriage, and pushed all the housework onto me, harassing me when my husband wasn't around. She would spill flour right after I had cleaned, or throw away the food I had made. Even when I talked to Scott about it, all he would say was, I'll talk to her, but despite pushing for us to live together, he didn't do anything. So, even though we were newlyweds, I was already stressed out. But in the midst of all this, there was one person who was on my side. I can't believe it. You're leaving everything to Kristen. Mom, you can move too, you need to share the work. It was my sister-in-law, Vanessa, who scolded my mother-in-law for lounging on the sofa while I was doing housework. It's fine. Kristen wants to do it. That can't be true. Scott, you need to properly scold Mom too. Why am I getting scolded too? Vanessa, who was mature for her 22 years, not only scolded Scott, who was watching TV, but also helped me with the housework. Let's do it together, she said with a cheerful smile, and I felt my heart being healed. Vanessa had been friendly with me since I started dating her brother. But there was a reason why she had become so attached to me, related to an incident a few years ago. That day, Vanessa was heading to her final interview at her first choice company during her job hunt, but the train was delayed. When I happened to see her looking lost at the station, I drove her to the venue. After that, she successfully got the job offer and started working at that company, and she became even more fond of me. I'll always be on your side. Vanessa's carefree smile was one of the reasons I could endure these lonely days. However, a few months later, a big incident occurred that even her support couldn't help. Honey, I'm pregnant. One day, feeling something off about my body, I went to the hospital and called Scott with the exciting news. Having children had always been my dream. That's great. So I'm going to be a dad. Hearing Scott's happy voice on the phone, my heart was filled with joy like never before. Despite my worries, I still loved my husband at that time. Just thinking about raising a child together with him made my heart flutter. Surely now Scott will pay more attention to our family. However, even at this point, my mother-in-law seemed to resent my happiness. I wasn't expecting much, but when I told her about the pregnancy, she just nodded indifferently. There was no consideration for my condition, rather, she started making me go shopping at distant stores and carry heavy furniture, increasingly burdening me. Then, on a day when my belly had grown quite big, it happened. Geez! You're so slow, you're in the way. My mother-in-law, more irritated than usual, suddenly pushed me from behind. As a result, I lost my balance and hit my stomach hard on the corner of a table. Ouch! At that moment, I was struck by a pain I had never experienced before. With a bad feeling, I called an ambulance myself and headed to the hospital, leaving my mother-in-law who had fled to her room. The test results were horrific, something I wanted to turn away from. Not only had I miscarried due to the impact, but I had also become unable to have children. Because of you, I can never meet my baby again. How are you going to take responsibility for this? When I returned home, I confronted my mother-in-law, crying in shock. If only she hadn't done such a thing, I might have been able to meet my child in good health. It's your fault for being so clumsy, isn't it? How cowardly of you to blame others. But my mother-in-law didn't even show a hint of apology and continued to hurl abuse at me. And what shocked me the most were my husband's words after I explained the whole situation. I understand you're sad, but it was an accident, right? There's nothing we can do about it. He didn't even try to accept my tearful plea. Even though I could no longer hope for children, why did my husband think he could dismiss it as unavoidable? Was his joy over the pregnancy a lie? Let me tell you, don't even think about something stupid like divorce. If you leave, I'll bring Vanessa back to take care of the housework. After Scott returned to his room, my mother-in-law drove the nail in, as if to further crush my despair. Honestly, divorce had crossed my mind as she said, but I couldn't let my dear sister-in-law go through these days. When Vanessa learned about the miscarriage, she naturally scolded my mother-in-law, but even her voice was no longer a comfort to me. As if she had given up, Vanessa's visits gradually decreased. I want Vanessa to be happy. With all hope taken away and despairing for the future, I just mechanically went about doing household chores as ordered by my mother-in-law. I even felt it was pointless to think about anything anymore. But after 3 years of lonely time, one day, an unexpected turn of events occurred that reversed all circumstances. Vanessa, who hadn't shown her face for a while, came to the house. Actually, I'm pregnant with my loved one's baby. I'm planning to marry him soon. That's wonderful. I hope the baby is born healthy. My mother-in-law was overjoyed at Vanessa's somewhat radiant announcement. It was unfortunate with Kristen, so you be careful. And as Scott smiled without any ill intent, I excused myself to go shopping, leaving the scene. As much as I wanted to be happy about Vanessa's pregnancy, I couldn't bear to see his reaction, which was completely different from when it was me. But that's when it happened. Kristen. When I turned around after hearing my name called, to my surprise, Vanessa had run after me. What's wrong? You need to be careful with your body. Actually, there's something I really want to tell you. And then she approached me with an unexpected story. Vanessa strongly grasped my hand as I stood bewildered after hearing everything. Now it's my turn to help you. At Vanessa's words, looking at me with straight eyes, tears that I thought had long since dried up overflowed from my eyes. A few months later, I was waiting at home with my mother-in-law and husband for Vanessa to arrive. Today was finally the day she had promised to bring her fiancé. I'm home. I've brought him. Vanessa arrived at the house with a tall, polite man. And the next moment, Scott stared at the man with wide eyes. Huh? Mr. Miller. As Scott stood up in shock, Vanessa grinned at him. Are you surprised? You probably never thought my fiancé would be the son of your company's president, did you? It turned out that the man called Mr. Miller was working at the same company as Scott to take over his father's business. In other words, he was the young master. Apparently, Mr. Miller had fallen in love at first sight with Vanessa, who was working as a receptionist at another company, and their relationship had developed from there. So Vanessa will be the president's wife in the future. As expected of my daughter. Understanding the situation, my mother-in-law expressed even more joy. Although he still seemed bewildered, Scott also had a happy smile on his face. Probably thinking that having the president of a first-class company as a relative would bring them some benefit. However, betraying their expectations, I quietly stood next to Vanessa. But this will be the last time she comes to this house. My mother-in-law and Scott gaped, unable to grasp the situation. The truth is, at this point, Vanessa and I had already made a certain decision. Huh? Don't say such selfish things. You were just ignoring it, but Vanessa has always been angry about what's been happening. A few seconds later, I glared coldly at my mother-in-law, who had shouted as if coming to her senses. Then Vanessa stepped forward and began to reveal her true feelings in a low voice. "I've been warning you about how you treat Kristen, but since it seems your personality won't change, I'm cutting ties with you." On that day when Vanessa stopped me, she told me about a certain plan. For these 3 years, she had been worried about me and was plotting to somehow free me from my mother-in-law. The reason Vanessa stopped coming home was that she had given up on trying to make my mother-in-law and Scott, who showed no signs of remorse, change their ways. However, she was trying to rescue me with a different strategy. And that plan was to cut ties with her family home, including me, on the occasion of her marriage. Don't tell me you're still holding a grudge about the child. Of course. What Mom did to Kristen is absolutely unforgivable. I was speechless with Scott, who was standing there dumbfounded after being admonished by Vanessa. What on earth did I fall in love with in this man before we got married? That's all made up. I didn't do anything. You're being deceived by this woman. Despite being told so much by Vanessa, my mother-in-law, refusing to admit her faults, pointed her finger at me. In response to her, I took out my smartphone, seizing the opportunity. Can you still say that after seeing this? Finally closing her mouth in shock at the video being played, my mother-in-law. It was evidence footage of harassment that I had been collecting for several months since hearing about Vanessa's plan. Thanks to her, I found courage. I'm submitting this to a lawyer and divorcing Scott. Vanessa gave me an unchanged smile as I strongly declared this. For a long time, I had given up on my own future, feeling hopeless and that nothing could be done. However, thanks to her reaching out to me, I was finally able to take action to carve out a bright future for myself. Divorce? No way. I refuse. By the way, we know what you did too. Vanessa sharply cut off Scott, who had started to throw a tantrum. As if he had a guilty conscience, he stiffened in surprise. And as if this was a signal, Mr. Miller, who had been quiet until now, started to explain the situation, saying, "We did a little investigation at the company." According to him, Scott's self-centered attitude was the same at work. He harassed subordinates who didn't do as he wanted, bullied colleagues he didn't like into resigning, and these misdeeds came to light with just a little digging by Mr. Miller. Apparently, this had already been reported to his father, the president, and there was already talk of firing Scott. No way. Divorce and getting fired from work is impossible. How am I supposed to live without a job or family? Realizing the gravity of the situation, Scott turned pale and cried out in anguish. Seeing him collapse, my mother-in-law also started to panic. "Please, both of you, don't say such strange things. Besides, Kristen has nowhere to go even if she leaves here, right? It's already decided that Kristen will be employed at his company. Mom, give it up." At Vanessa's merciless words, both of them turned their gaze to me. "Come on, reconsider. We're husband and wife, right? If things stay like this, we won't be able to live. Help us, Kristen." I sighed deeply at the two desperately clinging to me. In the end, They just wanted to use me for their own benefit until the very end. There was no reason for me to lend a hand to such people. This is all the outcome you brought upon yourselves. Don't make me laugh by asking for help now." And so, I shook them off and left the house with Vanessa and Mr. Miller. After that, I successfully divorced Scott. With the evidence I had gathered, it was determined that the treatment I had received was terrible, and my mother-in-law was ordered to pay $30,000 in compensation. And as Mr. Miller had said, Scott was fired from the company. My mother-in-law and Scott, who had been living on inheritance and pension, are now living in poverty together, I hear. On the other hand, Vanessa cut ties with her family home and is now happily married to Mr. Miller. I also continue my relationship with her, have returned to society, and am now living a fulfilling life. From now on, I want to live